So here, I've already shown us this map on an earlier presentation, but this is, of course, the map of Europe during the High Middle Ages. Of course, down here is Aquitaine. Here you see in Spain, Castile and Aragon, the two foremost provinces of Spain that will be united in the later phase of the Middle Ages. Here, of course, is the domains of the Holy Roman Empire. The brown here. And down here, of course, the Papal States. Now, the Holy Roman Empire was something that kind of emerged, is most associated with emerging during the reign of the Carolingian king, or Charlemagne the Great. And Charlemagne was coronated the Holy Roman Emperor and the defender of the Papacy. It's called the Holy Roman Empire because the idea is that this is Christendom and that it is defended by the monarch that is coronated by the Papacy. And Charlemagne was historically is dated as being coronated by the Pope on Christmas in the year 800. Interestingly, though, while we typically associate the Middle Ages with the almost unshakable political power of the Catholic Church, the reality is that during the time of Charlemagne, that really had not yet developed. Charlemagne only took that sort of that title, Holy Roman Emperor and Defender of the Papacy. He took that somewhat grudgingly. It wasn't something he adamantly asked for, though he did deploy Christianity as a unifying force in his empire. It's kind of a loose, far-flung empire at the time. But when he accepted that, he was certainly defending the Pope. The Pope in Rome had for years been subject to threats, violence, potential kidnapping from various groups within the area that today is modern Italy. And so the Pope at that time and the Papacy at that time, the Catholic Church in 800, had yet to become the sort of, if you will, almost all-powerful political authority in medieval Europe that it becomes. The Catholic Church's sort of overwhelming power in medieval Europe is associated most with its sort of rise during the High Middle Ages. And its demise from total political power, too, is associated largely with deterioration, particularly during the late Middle Ages. And that, of course, gives rise to new ways of thinking and understanding the world that you see with the Renaissance, with humanist philosophy, with science and the Enlightenment, and so forth. This photo here is a photo that I took. That's why it's not that great a photo. But it's a photo I took from Salzburg, Austria, and up here on this stone precipice, about 400 feet up, is the Hohensalzburg Castle, and I am down here near the crypts of the Abbey of St. Peter's. It's one of the oldest in Europe, dating back to the 7th and 8th century. The reason I use this picture is because this place is actually sort of in a way, at the center of the disputes that eventually helped to lead to the Catholic Church sort of asserting its an almost universal power in Europe at this time. There was a dispute between Pope Gregory VII, and various, shall we say, lay kings or secular monarchs within Europe. So the Catholic Church under Gregory VII would deem that the Pope was the vicar of heaven on earth, that effectively they were the divine mandate, that they were the only entity that could distribute the sacraments and the various proceedings of a true mass, that the only individuals that could do that were those that did so under the authorization of the Catholic Pope, that the Pope and the Catholic Church were effectively the only intermediary between the earth, the world of material things, and heaven. This was during a crisis known as, sometimes called the Investiture Controversy. But so if you imagine during the Middle Ages or any time, if you have a political authority like the Catholic Church is very, very powerful, and you want to assert your own sort of power, the way to do that would be to appoint people that were loyal first to you. And so lords and monarchs in Europe, as the Catholic Church was growing in power, would oftentimes seek to appoint, and that's the investiture part, lay investiture, that lay people would appoint their people to run church affairs. And then this would allow those people a certain level of leverage when it came to asserting their own independence above that of the church itself. The individual who is constructing and residing here in this castle actually tried to do that, tried to appoint their own people, resisted the church's desire to block a layperson's investiture in church affairs. Ultimately, the monarchs failed in this because at this time period, the way people knew in the world, the way people understood in the world, literacy rates are incredibly low. People do not have public education, let alone college for the overwhelming mass majority of people. The first universities are only now being established. And so the way people knew was through religion. And the church established itself as the not only centerpiece of religion, but the centerpiece of knowledge, the centerpiece of power when it came to a person's future, not only on earth, but of course after. And so people's way of understanding and knowing the world was channeled through religious belief. And it was the church that could control that. And so the church's real power, once you had a widespread sort of body of Catholics in Europe, the church could use the power of those people to effectively shape and control the monarchs of Europe. And what I mean by that is the Catholic Church would say, if you don't accept the banning of lay investiture, if you don't accept that only the Catholic Church, only the Pope can appoint people to run the various dioceses, then the Catholic Church would say, okay, then no one in your domain can receive any of the sacraments. You cannot participate in a true mass in your domain. The Catholic Church will basically ban that. And then, of course, what would happen is the people would rise up and revolt against their monarch, because the people feel like now their ability to participate in an affair, in an event that is fundamental to their future after death, particularly, and those of their loved ones, is being withheld to them. And so the power of the church is linked to not only the ability to gain converts, but the ability of the Catholic Church to be the functioning vehicle through which people knew their world, how they understood the realities of earthly existence, the reality of the cosmos, the metaphysical realities of spirit world, and these types of things. And this gave the church during the High Middle Ages a great deal of power and allowed them an ability to influence monarchs that otherwise might seek to exert influence over the church or separate from it. One of the most sort of overt examples of power during the High Middle Ages was during the papacy of Innocent III. Pope Innocent III was associated with some pretty extreme measures in his efforts to maintain and exert the authority of the Catholic Church to basically create. During this period, there's no differentiation. You don't have options in terms of how you wish to practice. The Catholic Church in Western Europe was asserting that anything but the Catholic doctrine was a form of heresy, which could be met with extreme punishment. Innocent III, who is, of course, it's of course Pope Urban II, who called the First Crusade. The crusade was called in 1095 and began around about 1099. The Crusades, we usually think about the Crusades as these efforts to send various lords and military figures and religious figures to the Holy Land, to Palestine, to reestablish, or to establish, I should say, Christian domains, and so-called Crusader states exist for a period of time in those areas. But actually, there were crusades that happened in Western Europe as well. The first such crusade in Western Europe was actually an undeclared crusade that was associated with basically a pogrom, a persecution of Jewish people. It's called the Rhineland Crusade, and it began shortly after Pope Urban II's calling of the First Crusade. And people said, well, Jewish people must be heretics as well. And some people are going to go to the Holy Land, but they turned around and they said, there's heretics or there are non-believers, Jewish people here among us, and they sought to persecute them in a pogrom. A pogrom is a term for an organized persecution of Jewish people that happened across Europe for upwards of 1,000 years before you had the horrifying events of the Holocaust. So the Crusades did not always direct themselves at the Islamic world, but also sometimes at the Jewish world and other targets. Some of them Christian. Pope Innocent III actually called a crusade called the Albigensian Crusade. Sometimes it's called the Cathars Crusade, and this was in France. And the Cathars were a group of people that were Christians, but they were deemed heretics by the church because they believed that that anything of the material world was a human creation. And so they denied the divine nature of the church and refused to practice in the sort of Catholic Church in the manner that the papacy sought. And Innocent III infamously launched a crusade against these Christians who were considered heretics. And in one of the most frightful and infamous cases, it's told that a group of people, women and children, were taking refuge in a church, and the Crusaders went into the church and slaughtered them. And allegedly, one of the soldiers asked the leader, what if you go in there and you kill, one of a true Christian? Wouldn't that be bad, effectively? And the leader famously, or infamously, I should say, said, infamously, kill, God will know his own. And this was in the town of Béziers. And the idea was, if you kill them, then they're going to go to heaven anyway, even if they're truly Catholic. And it really speaks to the really overwhelming power of the Catholic Church to be able to inspire people to carry out such acts in this case. The Catholic Church weakening really began in the 1300s, and this is largely associated with the Avignon Captivity of the Papacy.